colleagues, if we can
Bonjour, chers
at the table and get started on today's agenda. We had a busy day yesterday. We managed to finish, I think, just about on time. It would be good today to try also to finish on time and maybe even harvest a little bit. So while obviously encouraging a good discussion around the table, if we can encourage all interventions to be on point and helping us move forward through the agenda. So with that, we'll start on agenda item 14, which is the report on the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel, the STAP. I know that there was a STAP meeting before we met in Council, and that was well attended. And thank you again to Rosina and all our colleagues on the STAP to make themselves available to Council and to all the participants at the meeting and the Assembly. The scientific basis on which we work is critical, and it's my pleasure, therefore, to ask Rosina to present her report. Rosina.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I think you have come to expect me to start each of my presentations with some wonder of nature, and I have to say, being in Vietnam, that made it very, very difficult. So let's start with the first slide. Vietnam is one of the world's most biologically diverse countries in the world, and 10% of the world's mammal, bird, and fish species, and 40% of local plant species exist only in Vietnam. So I wanted to start and show you a few examples, if I could pull up the slides. Or not. Yeah, I am clicking on them.
You test these things and then they never work.
This is the well-known Rosina information technology problem. I can make computers crash just by looking at them. We did test it several times.
It looks like it's coming.
No, it's searching.
No, it's not.
It is me. So I wanted to start with some of Vietnam's wonders of nature because they are many and extraordinary. So on the top left is Ziegler's Crocodile Newt. This is a newly discovered salamander, which actually looks like a Klingon from Star Trek, and I know we have many Star Trek fans in the room. The second one is the Ammonite striped rabbit, which was just recently discovered also in the Ammonite Mountains. And we thought the only other striped rabbit was in Sumatra, so very cool. I mentioned how many amazing plant species. So the third one is the Vietnamese golden cypress, a new conifer that was discovered in 1999, and scientists were aghast because it seemed to be both a new genus and species at the time. It was only found in very steep limestone ridges, so it was already endangered by the time we found it. But the one on the right, the glue-spitting Vietnamese velvet worm, also recently discovered. These worms are really hard to find because they hide in hollow logs. To hunt, they sneak up on prey, and then the sliming begins. The velvet worms hunt by spraying a net of glue onto their prey and immobilize them. A few more, the Couid land crab, which is an endemic land crab, and this is considered a bridge between terrestrial ecosystems and the marine environment, and it's a biological indicator actually of the health of both. And this population was being depleted due to overharvesting, but a GEF Small Grants program is now supporting sustainable harvesting, and several of us will have a chance to visit this later in the week. The Redshank Languor, a species of old world monkey, among the most colorful of all primates, and it's sometimes called the costumed ape. I think you can see why, because of its extravagant appearance. From its knees to its ankle, it has red stockings, and it appears to be wearing white gloves. And there are only about 13 of these living in the Santra Peninsula, which is very close to where we are, so very much worth a visit. This great hornbill is listed by IUCN as a rare and declining resident. The females seal themselves up into the hollow of a tree with dung and pellets of mud that the male supplies, and then the male... Amazing Vietnamese mossy frog called the Tonkin bug-eyed frog. And its camouflage is considered the most elaborate in all of nature. They are known to be ventriloquists too, so they can throw their voice and make it very hard for you to find them. Anyway, I just couldn't decide which one to show you, so here are some of the amazing wonders of nature all around us right now. And here are some other wonders of nature, the STAP panel. And as you may know, this is the very last appearance of two of our Southern Hemisphere STAP stalwarts. So Annette Couid and Ralph Sims, who have covered land degradation and mitigation respectively. And I want to thank the council because you did a fabulous job of spreading the announcement for our need for new panel members. And we have a very rich pool of applicants, but we are going to miss Annette and Ralph very greatly for their wit and wisdom and dancing and many other contributions. And on a very sober note, our much-loved emeritus professor, Michael Stocking, passed away in May, and many of you have known or worked with Michael. He was no stranger to the GEF community, having worked with us for 13 years. He was STAP's vice chair. He was an advisor to the previous chair of STAP, Tom Lovejoy, and to me. And he was very instrumental in establishing the land degradation focal area by defining the scientific rationale for sustainable land management. I think he began making that case way back in the Second Assembly in China back in 2002. So we're very honored to have worked with Michael, to call him our champion for land, and he had many good things to say about farmers' knowledge. And this quote, I think, is especially worth noting. The livelihoods of most rural people are directly supported by soil, and all of us, whether in recreation or occupation or subsistence, depend upon soil as the hub of all life-supporting processes. So wise words from a wise man. Michael served us with admirable loyalty and grace, and we will miss him tremendously. What I want to do now is talk about two things. One, the 8 papers that STAP has prepared as its contribution to the Assembly. You have 5 that are already completed, 3 more in process that will show up by the December Council, and how they were conceived as kind of a linked set to help with the transformational change that the GEF is seeking. So I'll tell you also then a little bit about our very early thinking about the GEF 7 work program, since Council wanted to be involved in that. But obviously the starting point for us is the science. And the planetary boundaries indicates that several have already been breached, more are at risk, and large-scale transformational change is really required to deal with all these interrelated issues. So on the downside, things are getting worse. On the upside, the need to seek co-benefits and integration has been recognized. And as well, we are seeing dramatic improvements in technological development and deployment. Think about remote sensing, geographic information systems, renewables, information technology. And there's the promise of many more breakthroughs to come in nanotechnology and novel entities that can enhance food productivity, et cetera. So at the last Assembly report in Cancun, STAP urged that GEF 6 tackle environmental degradation in a more holistic and integrated way. We urged that we pursue, quote, environmentally sustainable development to make environment and social dimensions of well-being, that's people and the environment, co-equal to economic concerns. However, it's all too apparent that environmental and social aspects are often given less attention. But when economic, social, and environmental goals can be aligned, we can regrow those tiny Mickey Mouse ears to be co-equal. And working on that reconnection is actually what guided STAP's work for the Assembly. So for Vietnam, we produced not just 1, but 8 papers this time, and we focused on what we consider 3 interrelated themes: integration, innovation, and learning. And the papers were conceived of as a linked set. So the starting point, again, is that the science addressing these interconnected and interacting environmental and social challenges really requires systems thinking, which is fundamental to better integration. You know, the old ways of take, make, waste can't continue. And so 2 prime examples that we wrote about in our integration segments are the food system and plastics, and we examined how each could become more circular instead of linear economies. And a 4th report in that category, which actually emanates back to STAP's 5th Assembly report, elaborates on how and why the GEF needs to integrate environmental security concerns into its activities. Just one statistic, for example, 1/3 of GEF recipient countries proposed and implemented projects while armed conflict was occurring in that country. So clearly, those conditions are relevant to project design, to project outcomes, and durability. Achieving GEF's goals of transformation require innovation, and we have 2 papers that look at that. One broadly focused on innovation across innovative business models, institutional and social innovation, as well as policy, financial, technological innovation, and then a second that focuses on the emergence of novel technologies, which can have both positive and negative disruptive effects on the Earth system, and we need to think about this. And then finally, in the area of learning, knowledge management, which has been a mainstay of my council presentations every time, is an essential element for successful integration, both to ensure that what has already been learned is applied to new investments and for scaling up. So we have a report on knowledge management, and then we also have a report on how to integrate local learning and local institutions into improving the global commons, that thinking from the bottom up. So we hope that all of these will help the GEF design better investments to deliver even greater environmental benefits more effectively and efficiently, and making the best use of the donor's money. Transformational change necessarily involves risks, but it is clear that business as usual is not an option. New innovative activities that we've already undertaken in the form of the integrated approach pilots and the new IPs offer new models for integration and, we hope, transformation. I spoke extensively about the integration paper at our last council, so I'm just going to quickly recap that our STAP review of the peer-reviewed literature and working with the broader community led us to recommend 7 elements that the GEF could adopt. First, applying systems thinking, that is, address interconnected environmental, social, economic, and governance challenges. Second, develop a clear rationale and a theory of change in projects, and think about whether you might need a plan B if desired outcomes aren't materializing. Third, assess the potential risks and vulnerabilities to a project and measure the system's resilience to expected and unexpected shocks. Fourth, have a logical sequence of interventions that itself can be responsive to changes, different circumstances, as well as the learning that you're developing along the way. Fifth, develop explicit plans and funding for good quality knowledge management, not as an afterthought. And sixth, exemplary stakeholder engagement with local communities, not just with government officials. And seventh, flexibility in project preparation to accommodate the additional transaction costs and time that we understand it takes to tackle complex issues. So that was our integration paper. Integration of the food system. I think I might have shown you the linear food system, take, make, waste, which needs to be fundamentally transformed. If you think we need to increase food by 50% by 2050, and in a way that does not degrade the environment and which is more sustainable, this current system is responsible for probably 25% of greenhouse gas emissions directly, probably another 10 to 15% from land use change. Some allege up to 2/3 of biodiversity loss is due to the broad food system, and 70% of freshwater withdrawals due to it. So the global goals of the GEF on land degradation, on clean water, on sustainable forest management, on climate change mitigation and adaptation, and biodiversity conservation can't be met if the food sector is not much better aligned with these objectives. So transitioning to a more sustainable system, this circular economy model, where you recycle the water, which are the blue arrows, recycle the nutrients, which are the red arrows, and use renewable sources of energy, including waste from all of the above, would conserve soil, water, energy, and biological resources. And the GEF is already attempting to reconcile increased food production with sustainability and resilience through 2 of our IAPs, food security and commodities. And in the short term, reducing food loss and wastes can be achieved through the more efficient use of resources. And there are many ways to do this, and we talk about them. But for example, you could be promoting conservation tillage, energy efficient food processing and transport, sustainable land management, precision farming, eating lower on the food chain. And so the new IP on food systems, land use, and restoration impact program, we think offers a real opportunity to begin to try to incorporate the circular economy in food into it. Okay, plastics. Plastics are ubiquitous, and as I look around the room, I would say probably at least half of you are old enough to remember The Graduate, where the answer to the future was plastics. And there was also a song by Shel Silverstein in 1971 that was "Everything's going to be plastics by and by." Well, it's coming true. Plastics contribute to economic growth, but the way we produce and use them is causing major problems. So on the left, you see current estimates, and on the right, estimates for 2050 under business as usual. So you see 380 million tons now, quadrupled by 2050. You see 6% of oil now, up to 20% in 2050. 1% of global CO2 emissions, potentially up to 15% by 2050. And if you look at the post-use phase on the left again now, and 2050 on the right, you see waste in landfill first. You see total waste first, then you see waste in landfill, then you see tons in the ocean, and then you finally see weight of plastic compared to fish. And so if you look at that last line, by 2050 it is estimated there will be more plastic by weight in the ocean than fish. So microplastics are emerging source of soil and freshwater pollution. We're finding microplastics in tap water, in bottled water, in mussels, in shellfish, just about everywhere. So again, the problem is the current linear model, as in our current linear food system of make, use, and dispose. And the circular economy model would keep resources in use as long as possible, extract maximum value from them, and regenerate products and materials at the end. And so when you think of some possible solutions, they could include make the plastics from alternative non-fossil fuel feedstocks, use waste as a resource, redesign plastic manufacturing processes to enhance longevity, reusability, and waste prevention, collaborate between businesses and consumers to encourage recycling, and the list can go on and on. So our paper provides recommendations for both the short term, for example, on reuse and recycling, and preventing and minimizing waste, and then over the long term for development of alternatives. Our next paper is on environmental security, and we actually, as I already mentioned, think of this as part of integration as well. At the 2014 GEF Assembly, staff recommended more attention to environmental security, and I say in quotes there, to enable improved human well-being, health, security, livelihoods, and social equity at the same time as environmental benefits. And it is really not a question of whether to engage. The GEF is deeply engaged, and the question is really how to do it most effectively. And environmental security is really central, if you think about it, to all the focal areas: international waters and transboundary cooperation, biodiversity hotspots and civil strife, land degradation, food and water security, climate resilience, pollution, green energy, and environmental justice. And I already said that a third of the GEF countries that received money were in a conflict state when they both proposed and implemented or its absence. But environmental security includes the roots of sustainable livelihoods, health, and well-being among households and community. So we think GEF investment outcomes and durability may be at risk if environmental security is not considered. And so we think it's important to try to explicitly address environmental security in your project and program design. Think about what's happening in that country in terms of environmental security when you're developing the theory of change. We also would note that most of the GEF agencies make use of protocols to think about environmental security, and maybe there's some lessons there and some collaboration that can happen. Third, we think that the links between environmental change and vulnerability in GEF interventions need to be considered. So you know we've developed the RAPTA tool, our Resilience, Adaptation, Pathways, and Transformation Assessment, which is one way to think about how project interventions may or may not mitigate or reverse environmental trends. And then contribute, obviously, to conflict prevention through environmental cooperation. So we have plenty of examples there. Transboundary river basin institutions, securing forest tenure for livelihoods of indigenous communities, supporting pastoralists and arid land farmers to build institutions for water sharing. Okay, so to make a dent in these challenges, we've said we need transformational change, integrated thinking, systems thinking, circular economy thinking. And to be transformational, we need to do things differently and do it consciously, as a conscious effort, not kind of as happenstance or serendipity. And so that leads us to our papers about innovation and thinking about a culture of innovation in the GEF. And so that can include many dimensions: technological, business, institutional, policy, financing. But we are the science guys, and so we have thought the most about technology. And we will have more to say on this again in the December council meeting. But in the technology realm, novel entities is one, as I've mentioned, that we think the GEF will need to consider over the course of GEF 7. So you define novel entities as things that are created and introduced into the environment by human beings that can have positive or negative effects. So that could be synthetic organic pollutants, it can be radioactive materials, it can be genetically modified organisms, it can be nanomaterials. But you know, we've done this before where we've introduced substances into the Earth system that we thought would be solutions for our needs. For example, of course, chlorofluorocarbons were introduced as a replacement for toxic refrigerants because we thought they were stable. Well, they weren't when they got to the ozone layer and became a key driver of ozone depletion. Similarly, many of our persistent organic pollutants were introduced for beneficial use in agriculture or disease control or industrial manufacturing processes, and later we learned that they were harmful to ecosystems, biodiversity, and human health. So 3 novel entities that we mention and highlight in our report. First, gene editing. I think you've all heard of CRISPR. Well, the new techniques offer the possibility to better control vector-borne diseases, to improve animal husbandry, to help plants adapt to climate change, but they could pose a threat to biodiversity unless there is adequate governance and institutional structures in place. Technology critical elements, often known as the rare earth elements, so platinum, palladium, rhodium, germanium, lanthanides, these are used in emerging and green technologies, but their mining and their processing happens mainly in the developing countries where GEF works, and the disposal of their end products are leading to chemical pollution, biodiversity loss, deforestation, and land degradation. A third area that we think is emerging and very interesting for us to watch is cellular agriculture, the idea that you can produce livestock products like meat or leather or fur without the animal itself and reduce the environmental effects. Could be very valuable in the new food system, but how will these products be regulated? What are the challenges of intellectual property and the looming issue, of course, of public acceptance? So our thought is that the GEF should focus on managing the risk and harnessing the opportunity offered by technology critical elements, get a better understanding of gene editing and where or not it might be relevant, and to monitor the development of cellular agriculture. So we will make further recommendations in this broad area of novel technologies in December, so stay tuned. And our third area, of course, is learning. So innovation, integration, and learning. We really believe that knowledge management is an essential element of successful integration to ensure what has already been learned is used and that it can be used to scale up. We think done well, knowledge management gets the right information to the right person at the right time. And we do believe that knowledge management is still an underexploited resource and think it should be a primary source of value for the GEF. We've done a couple of practical things to help with this. We've developed some learning questions and we have some advice on what we screen for with KM. We are really happy that the new IAPs have KM in their structure from the outset and a small amount of money set aside, and so we do applaud that. So the GEF has made some significant progress on KM, but we think more is needed if the GEF is truly going to exploit its full power and be transformational in GEF 7. Also in the learning realm, local commons for global benefits. So the planetary boundaries highlight stresses and risks to the global commons, but addressing some of those critical global boundaries depend on local commons, notably on like land use change, on biodiversity loss, and we see trends tend to be most severe in areas of poverty and where there's weak governance institutions. And there's often overlap with areas of rich biodiversity. So if institutions and managements of the local commons can be restored, there can be benefits not only to local livelihoods, globally significant outcomes such as halting deforestation and land degradation and biodiversity loss. Again, more on this at the December Council. So building on the themes that led to us giving you these papers of integration, innovation, and learning, just want to run through some of our very early ideas of work that STAP could do for GEF 7. Under the theme of integration, climate risk screening, the GEF Council provided guidance in 2010 requesting climate risks to be addressed in projects. Right now, there's no coherent screening taking place across all the GEF agencies, but many agencies, including the development banks and UNDP, do screen for climate risk routinely. And STAP thinks that comparing notes on these practices could be very helpful in achieving the Council's goal. And actually, we've done a lot of preliminary analysis and reading of dozens of PIFs and PRODOCs, and we think we can make a real contribution here. In the stakeholder engagement in socio-ecological systems, this is the idea, let's build on the RAPTA, which has so far been tested mainly in land degradation and food security, but the resilience concept should be valuable for the other focal areas and multifocal areas. We're working on land degradation neutrality guidelines, and they will support GEF's objectives of establishing baselines, indicators, and metrics for monitoring and assessing GEF's interventions, and this will also support the Convention on Combating Desertification objectives, which are to monitor land degradation neutrality. And under the fourth one in integration, reducing climate vulnerability and climate adaptation. This is sort of related to the climate risk screening, but it's more on that response side. Thinking about adaptation, how would you know you succeeded? What kind of metrics might you develop? Under innovation, two particular areas that we think will be worth exploring. Amazing breakthroughs in recent years on remote sensing, and it's become available and accessible through a lot of public platforms such as the Global Forest Watch. So we hope to produce an information document to highlight which remotely sensed data products are most applicable to GEF projects for monitoring and measurement. And I think this would also be very helpful in the realm of environmental security as well. Aquaculture, boy, I talked a lot about how food insecure the world is. Fisheries are an important source of protein, but they are clearly under stress. And STAP would like to consider innovative aquaculture options, such as farming the water column, novel plant or animal nutrients, and the link to biodiversity. We would also look at the potential climate mitigation opportunities, too. And then in the areas of learning, we have three that we're thinking about. One is to really build on the early data collection for the global Mercury knowledge platform that we have done, and support monitoring and reporting on the implementation and compliance efforts under the Minamata Convention, as well as help with the development of Mercury initial assessments, or known as MIAs, and the national action plans. A second area, we'd like to help chemical and waste projects think beyond their act of cleaning up or preventing pollution, but actually think about the broader global environmental benefits and how would you estimate them from those projects. And of course, we're going to continue to push on monitoring, evaluation, and learning, hoping that projects and programs really put data collection systems in place, evaluate what works and what doesn't, learn from mistakes, and learn from successes. Both are really important to GEF's future. And of course, we will continue to work with the IAPs, the Food Security, Commodities, and Cities IAPs. A STAP person is working on each of those right now, and we stand ready to work with the GEF Partnership on designing the new impact program. So I wanted to get you our thoughts early in GEF 7 so we can benefit from your thinking as we develop these potential projects moving forward. And so I just wanted to end with one happy baby elephant reveling in an invigorating mud bath at the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust for Orphan Elephants in Nairobi. But we hope that him or her will help us remember that despite the challenges that our planet faces, nature is really resilient. And working through the GEF, all of us hope to make the planet's life systems more resilient and more sustainable together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosina. That was an excellent and, as always, entertaining presentation. I'm not sure I entirely believe you about that rabbit. It looked to me like it was on its way to a fancy dress party, but I'll take your word for it. Look, I think one thing in particular the Council will be pleased to get an early sense of, and recognising you did say it was an early indication of your work programme to show how STAP is intending to deliver on the GEF 7 work programme and how your work aligns with the priorities we've identified there. So that was very welcome to see that early on. At this point, I think we'll look to colleagues around the table to follow up with any questions or comments or any other thoughts about whether that rabbit was indeed the real deal or not. So, Council colleagues, the floor is yours. Thank you. Marita, please.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any particular comments. I would just like to thank staff very much for the excellent presentation and for the report and for the important role that you play in ensuring the scientific quality of GEF's policies and projects and programs. And I hope that we in the future will have a chance to have some more focused discussion on one of your themes that you are presenting. Very, very exciting research that you're doing, and it would be interesting if we can find time at one of the future councils to have a more focused discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Marita. Stefan, please.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and thank you, Rosina, for the, as always, inspiring and entertaining presentation. And the species, I will certainly look them up on the web again. On the same line as Marita, I guess it would be useful for the Council to once have a special session or whatever the format, the most appropriate format might be, to dig a little bit deeper on one of those topics that you presented as main dishes for the STAP in GEF 7. I have one brief question on some of those activities, which they all make sense to me. They're very needed, things like climate risk screening, global mercury knowledge platform. Perhaps you could tell us all who do you work with? You mentioned some of the partners, and you could enlighten us on what the specific role of STAP is in it. And then something that I guess you didn't mention too much, but it's the daily heartbread. Which is the screening of projects and programs. And perhaps you could enlighten us by saying how much of your resources go into the maybe less forward-looking but day-to-day, and very important because speaking for our constituency, we very much depend on a solid screening by STAP because that gives us the confidence that a project is solid. So thank you very much again to you and all the STAP members.
Thank you, Stefan.
Jan Peter.
Sorry, who's that?
Jan Peter.
Jan Peter, I think your flag's up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to the staff for a very interesting presentation, even with some cultural references from the 1960s that I enjoyed very much personally. The GEF is now entering into an important and challenging phase, and we're supposed to be much more integrative, cross-cutting, etc. And this is all very nice, but it doesn't come automatically, and it's challenging. And we believe that the STAP has a particularly important role to play here. the IAPs were not perfectly designed in our view regarding certain aspects of this. There was perhaps also some lack of transparency. And to quote from one of the papers distributed by staff, the IAPs and IPs impose greater needs for connections between child projects and program objectives. Knowledge management is the obvious means to tie these connections together, to collect evidence-based learning and achieve sustained impact that deliver benefits far into the future. Well said, not so easily done, and we believe STAP definitely has a real important role to play here. We could also add here that there is supposed to be a seamless kind of a connection and synergy between the focal areas and the impact programs. Also, that will not appear automatically. One example, of course, being marine plastics, marine littering, which is now anchored in 2 focal areas. And devil is in the details, and I'd like comments from STAP perhaps, how we can sort of, I mean, it's not only a job for you, it's a job for us as well, but it's obvious we have to follow this closely to have a well-designed child project portfolio in GEF 7. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan Peter. Next I see Johanna, and followed by Marilyn.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation and the STAT report. We believe that the need for integration is in a concise. We believe also that there is a need for integration in a concise and clarifying manner. We particularly note the recommendations in relation to circular economy and environment security, and believe that integrating these perspectives into GEF projects as appropriate can enhance the effectiveness and sustainability of the projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johanna. Marilyn, please.
Oui, merci.
Thank you for this presentation, which was absolutely wonderful. Your approach in terms of environmental observation through a scientific lens is not sufficiently widespread, and this kind of approach is highly relevant and enlightening. I have a question in terms of access to data. To be able to assess the different elements, climate risk, etc., that you referred to, it is necessary to have a certain technology that is well adapted in terms of accessing data. So for developing countries that don't necessarily have those technologies, how have you proceeded? How have you interacted as STAP with those countries to be able to acquire the data that you needed and that were the basis for your analysis? Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Rosina, I think back to you, if you could pick up those points.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try to address most of them. We did have a half-a-day discussion on Saturday, which I realized was before many of you got here, to have a more focused discussion on several of these papers. We do this at least once a year with the full staff in presence and invite all of Council and the agencies to come, but we will also look for more opportunities, obviously, as Sweden suggests, to have deeper conversations on this. There was a question about who we work with and when. All of the papers that we produced for the assembly, those that are completely done and those that are still underway, we first fanned out and asked all of the agencies if they had work occurring in these, and we involved them as appropriate in a couple of workshops when that was relevant, and we were also made aware of what they were doing. So for example, on Mercury, UNEP Live has been the most active trying to create this data platform, and Ricardo Ibarra, who is our chemicals and waste STAT panel member, has been working very closely with that. On the climate risk screening, I actually was involved in a previous life in helping to develop a few of these tools, one for the US, one for the World Bank, and a little bit for the Agency for International Development. And so we have applied those tools, for example, to project documents after the fact to see what risks might have been missed. And we're trying in turn then to take the best of those and suggest some ways that GEF projects could be screened for climate risk, but not make it so onerous that it's adding all this upfront time. So it's a delicate balance, as I think you said, to help countries and agencies find data, which we're very happy to do. Usually we can direct them to where there will be, as we would say, downscaled climate data for their region. And in many cases, there will be case studies of projects that are done in similar situations and what the climate risk is. So in general, you know, the GEF family is where we go to get help and to discuss, and the peer review world, the science connections that all the panel members have, we also try to bring the science into the GEF, but also the science needs of the GEF back out to the scientists in the real world who are not always focused on practitioner needs. So we really struggle, but we work on that. Norway said the IAPs are not perfect. Of course, they were innovative and new, and we did indeed, STAP did indeed say that we need to be sure that we make connections and that the child projects are delivering things that we are looking for at the program level. The potential bang for the buck of getting that right is great. We know the IEO has pointed out that collaboration can take more time. And so when I was talking about integration and flexibility, I think that's something we really need to work through to make sure the appropriate considerations and designs of projects are there up front. But it may be that the details of how you're going to ameliorate that climate risk or how you're going to deal with the environmental security issue might be things that are developed between the PIF and the project document, for example. But if you don't think about those things up front, you can get very far down the road in implementation and find out that your theory of change was not all that it should be. So I guess I did already mention a little bit of Senegal's question about how to get access to data. I mean, that is one of the things that we very commonly put in the PIFs, where we would suggest people go to find data on climate risk for a project, or how to find information that can flesh out the PIF as it moves from the PIF to the project documentation stage. And I think that was about all the questions. Did I miss any, Co-Chair?
No, I think that's good, but just before moving on, Rosina, I think I'd like to hear from our CSO network representative.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, and excellent presentation, Rosina, wonderful. Guillermo Harris, WCS Argentina. Just a small comment on aquaculture. Traditionally, it's been used, one uses introduced species, and therefore I think it's important in these presentations, I'm sure you've thought of it, to talk about using local species and to protect local biodiversity. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that. It's possible to do aquaculture quite wrong.
Brian, US, please.
Thank you, Rosina, for a tremendous presentation. I'd like to point out that we welcome the STAP's work to provide the science that guides the GEF's work to stem environmental degradation. And we look forward to the STAP's report to the GEF Assembly. We would like to note the integrated nature of the STAP's completed papers, which tightly link science and the potential policy options within the GEF programming, and are very supportive of the STAP's central focus on bringing scientific principles and research to the GEF's core areas of work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Manrique, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very inspirational presentation that we have just heard. together with the document we find very important and interesting, and we'd like to refer to, in particular, to the section Managing Knowledge for a Sustainable Global Future, in which there appears a number of recommendations from the STAP, which we find to be quite opportune and timely, and that, as per our opinion, they directly refer to something that we discussed yesterday, and which we discussed within our own constituents under a number of levels, if you want. That is the issue of transparency. And we believe that in that regard, that these recommendations, the recommendations found in this second attachment or annex, somehow are aimed at addressing this very important issue, that is transparency. Thank you.
I did realize I forgot to answer the question about how much of our work goes into screening. We screened 150 projects, for example, last year. On the knowledge management, I think we have encouraged the GEF for some time now to have an open data policy, and I think the great changes that are being made to what used to be PMIS and is now known as the portal will make it much easier to search past, present, and we hope future projects under development and make that data available to folks. I mean, a number of other things that we have done that I didn't talk about is we had been asked by the GEF to provide some guidance on how to think about multifocal area projects, what would be elements that would require you to do a multifocal. And so the knowledge that you think you're going to get as you work across several areas is very important to think about. And we also develop guidance, as you know, on resilience and how to build that into projects. So yes, open data policy, and I think the brave new day of the new portal will be making a lot more information available to everyone on lessons learned, good and bad.
Rosina, thank you very much once again for making STAP members available to the Council, both before the meeting and during. I'd like to join others who congratulated you and colleagues for the work that you've put in on the various reports, and again to thank you for a very enlightening and a presentation. I think we all learnt something, so you've satisfied one of your three pillars of integration, innovation and learning. You've shared some knowledge with us here today. So Rosina, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Okay, colleagues, we move on now to agenda item 15, the semi-annual evaluation report, which has been prepared by the IEO and shortly joined by Juha Juuto, who will come and talk to the paper. While Juha is coming over, can I take a second to just once again thank Juha and through you the entire IEO for the work that went into OPS 6. You, I hope, would be pleased to see that the policy and programme recommendations that the Council signed off yesterday were heavily influenced by OPS 6. It was a very solid piece of work, and the Council and hopefully the full GEF partnership benefited heavily from it. So thank you, Juha, and can I ask you to present the paper Semi-Annual Evaluation Report.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here, of course, in beautiful Da Nang and in this most important of GEF meetings. Rosina is a hard act to follow. I mean, she's very, very entertaining and informative and fun, but so I'll try to speed up a little bit my own usual delivery. We don't have a picture of all of the evaluation office people as STAP did, but there are 6 of us here in Da Nang, and including Gita Batra, who is my Deputy Director and Chief Evaluation Officer in the IEO. And if you want to meet the rest of the crowd, actually go to our booth downstairs because we have a video loop where everybody introduces themselves actually. I have to say also the fact that, you know, Michael Stocking's loss was a personal loss for myself also. I have known him since 1995, and we worked very closely together in the late 90s, and it was a real shock that we lost him so early. Anyway, so to the IEO. You know, I think we have pretty much saturated you with the OPS6 findings over the past 1.5 years, more or less. So I didn't think that this was the right point to introduce a lot of new evaluations, as we are entering into a new programming cycle, and I think we exhausted lots of the topics from the last round. So this time, what we have done actually is more or less that we've done some follow-up work to the OPS6, in particular to the when it pertains to sustainability, and we've also done some development activities for our own office. So this is basically the overall picture that I'm going to present. I should probably also say that you may note that post OPS6 we have moved from our dark black presentations into a brighter style and a new visual identity. So first, we have this perennial feature that we present in these council meetings, which is the annual performance report. We conduct it every year, looking at the projects that have been completed over time and in that last period. As there are no major surprises, so I don't want to go through all of these, you know, the percentage figures about what the performance ratings were and so forth, but I'll highlight a couple of issues that we've noted that may be of interest. So on this screen you can see that the outcome ratings continue to be almost stable for past GEF cycles, but we have had significant improvements over time in certain groups of countries. So here, for example, we have compared performance ratings from pilot to GEF 2 to performance in GEF 3 and onwards and until today. And we see groups of countries, including, that you see here on the screen, projects in Europe and Central Asia, regional projects overall, and then projects very notably in fragile states, which we have defined using the World Bank classification of countries into fragile states. That's of course a living categorization, and countries move in and out of these categories, but overall you can see a picture. And all of these three categories of countries, you have seen a significant increase in improvement in performance of more than 10 percentage points. So then we also try to, again, these figures speak for themselves, and there are no major surprises here, but again, we try to understand, and we are trying to get into more of, explanation of what is happening and why. So both the quality of implementation and the quality of execution, we found some factors in our analysis that actually explain what results in better performance quality. And in both aspects of implementation and execution, interestingly, a very concrete finding was the fact that projects which have effective steering committees actually have been performing better. These are positively correlated with performance ratings. The levels of country support that match or exceed expectations is also correlated with the quality of execution ratings. There may be no surprise there either, but important thing to notice. So in OPS 6, we found that the full materialization of co-financing is positively correlated with project outcome ratings, and the materialization of less than 50% of the anticipated co-financing ratio is negatively correlated with outcome performance. And as you see, co-financing has been materializing very well, and in its latest cohort, actually $8.4 to every GEF dollar invested has been raised as co-financing. Monitoring and evaluation. One of the things that you can see the trend. So both the design and the implementation of M&E systems in projects has improved over time quite significantly, and the trend continues basically. We have been looking into the terminal evaluations from projects. Of course, these are one of the most important building blocks for our work, and the quality of these terminal evaluations remains high, although we note that there are gaps in coverage, and in particular medium-sized projects, MSPs, have much less coverage of terminal evaluations than full-size projects. The other thing, of course, here is that the terminal evaluations are conducted or commissioned. Actually, it's interesting to note that all of the 18 agencies that work with the GEF partnership have quite different systems for monitoring and evaluation, and quite different ways of organizing the evaluation function. But all of these terminal evaluations are actually either conducted or commissioned by the agencies themselves. So there's some variation, and this is of course largely self-reporting type of activity. So in our future plan, in the couple of years that come, we actually plan to take a closer look at how the agencies do evaluations and how they manage M&E systems. Gender, a very important aspect, of course, and a priority for the GEF. The trends are positive, but at the same time, the number of projects that provide gender disaggregated data is still quite low, and we say that Africa region is the region where the gender reporting has been most advanced, or gender disaggregated data has been most advanced so far, but still obviously there's a lot to do. But the good news is that that there has been a sharp increase in the percentage of projects with gender-related information after the adoption of the GEF gender mainstreaming policy in 2011. So it's gone up actually from 18% to 57% after the adoption of the policy. Sustainability was one of these big issues that came out of OPS 6 and attracted a lot of interest in the council and in the replenishment process. When we had to report that likelihood of sustainability at project completion was somewhat lower than the outcome ratings of the project. So we decided that we shall look into this issue more in detail, and we have since we completed OPS 6 in October last year, so we've been focusing on the sustainability issue in our analysis. You can see that there's a lot of difference. Again, we did the same analysis when it comes from the early parts of the GEF and to newer parts, and you can see a clear improvement in many categories here. And for example, in climate change, there has been a statistically significant improvement in sustainability of projects over this time. We try to identify factors that contribute to sustainability. Obviously, quality of project preparation is very, very important here, and that the sustainability is planned from the outset, that it's not an afterthought. Country context influences this very much, and obviously government support. Quality of implementation and execution are important factors, as well as the materialization of co-financing, because it's important that there is it has to do obviously with the fact that you plan for how do projects carry, or how do countries, how do partners continue the benefits of the projects after the project is completed. So it has institutional factors, it has commitment, priority factors, and of course a financial factor. We also, when we say that we found that 62% of the projects were likely sustainable after completion. So this was a figure that obviously focused the attention of the council members quite well, and appeared low. But then our partners in the implementing agencies, for example, some of them came to us and said that, look, is this so bad? How do we do compared with other agencies? And so we did a comparator analysis here, and we looked into comparable multilateral organizations and so on, and found that the GEF 62% is not shockingly low. It's more or less in the same ballpark as everybody else. And obviously, I mean, if this were such an easy business, so then we would be out of business, right? So we we don't need GEF in that sense, but anyway, so this is sustainability. Obviously, is a priority that we have to look into, and higher sustainability ratings at project completion are associated with higher levels of post-project completion outcomes, the environmental stress reduction that the projects lead to, and broader adoption. And these are obviously, of course, all things that are high priorities for us. The key factors that contribute to higher sustainability of outcomes are, and I actually more or less said it already, but it's a high stakeholder buy-in, political support in the countries for the projects, that it's not just something external, but it is actually addressing a priority area, availability of financial support to follow up, and importantly, also sustained efforts from the executing agency. Then, just to show that we are also, not only STAP, but we are also very aware of these opportunities that geospatial analysis and remote sensing have the potential that they carry in doing our kind of work. And we have been increasingly utilizing existing publicly available data and data sets and remote sensing databases that are available to look into our projects. And here are just a few cases that I wanted to briefly touch upon and just give some contrasting experiences on project sustainability here. And I have to say that the way we have been able to do this analysis quite in a quick time. Also, we have been collaborating with universities and former STAP member who's a professor and using his students to do some of these analyses. So here is, for example, a case of the Babe National Park, which is located about 1,000 kilometers north from here, probably north. And here we could use remote sensing data to look into what has happened to the forest cover in the protected area before, during, and after the project. And here is a good case, for example. There has been a fairly significant increase in forest cover loss in the country, in Vietnam, and including in the buffer zone of the protected area. But in the protected area that has been supported by the GEF, forest cover loss has remained basically negligent. Here is another case from Cambodia in the Cardamom Mountains, where we did the same kind of analysis. Here in this case, the forest loss was contained at the lower level during the project period, but it increased significantly immediately once the project was completed, and we cannot see much difference between the protected area, the buffer zone, and the country level. Here in this case, literature, when you look into literature, it points out that the primary drivers of forest loss are illegal logging, agricultural expansion, and land concessions for rubber plantations. A third case is San Rafael National Park in Paraguay. Here is an interesting case because actually you can see that there has been an increase in forest loss in the protected area after the project was completed, whereas the forest loss has decreased in the buffer zone. And basically, this counterintuitive finding depends on the fact that the forest was already depleted in the buffer zone, so where you had remaining forest, so it was in the protected area, and when the project was over, so people moved in then and deforested. Then we have a case from Maico National Park in a fairly remote area in the DRC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where again we have a very nice case where there has been really no increase in deforestation in the protected area after the project, although there has been significant forest loss in the buffer zone, or more. Let's say it's not huge either. Perhaps here the explanation is again the fact that it's a very remote area, which is not easily accessible. So those were just examples, and we are digging deeper into this sustainability issue, and we have to do it both at the portfolio level and trying to understand the big drivers, but also it's very illustrative to look into the project cases. Then we worked on a tool of ecological forecasting which helps quantify land cover change and above ground carbon estimates for multiple time intervals and develop projections for the future. This is a study that we have been working on with NASA, again using geospatial tools. We think that this is and I should say that we used Kenya as a case study. And we looked into 12 terrestrial protected areas in Kenya where GEF has had interventions, and these covered very wide range of land cover types, from montane forests to coastal mangroves to deserts, grasslands, and shrublands, and so forth. But this area where GEF has had a very long and extensive involvement. So that's basically why we selected this as our pilot to study. Overall, we found that the protected areas, the 12 protected areas we looked into, have been very successful in preserving the carbon stocks above ground, forest, trees, vegetation, and so forth. The statistical model that we used in this analysis suggests that certain factors such as proximity to rivers and irrigated agriculture are main factors associated with land cover change. And agricultural expansion, as expected, is the most significant factor contributing to land cover change. Community engagement in reforestation efforts and installations of things like electric fences to avoid human-wildlife conflict and so forth have been contributing to both the socioeconomic and the conservation benefits. These are the overall results. So here's one of the places. This is Kakamega Forest Reserve in Western Kenya. But we did the same analysis for all the 12 protected areas, where we looked into forest cover change. And again, the beauty of this, using the remote sensing data is that you can go back in time and reconstruct these baselines in that sense. So then you have you can verify the data of what has happened, but also you can use this ecological modeling for forecasting to future, what is likely to happen. This trend appears very linear, but we are taking into account also the drivers and what is happening in the model. And so you can expect what's happening. And we did this for all of these 12. And the overall finding was that it has been that most of the protected areas have been sustaining the forest cover and the carbon stock very well. There's actually two areas, the Kakamega that I just showed, and then the Marenji Park, where there has been an increase in forest cover. In this Mount Kenya site, there has been a decrease, largely due to, again, development activities, agricultural expansion, agroforestry, and so on. It's a very densely populated area and in the central part of the country. But still, it's not disastrous. So overall, why we are doing these kind of things? Because we think that this, ecological forecasting using geospatial tools is useful in measuring impacts and as well as in carrying out ex-ante assessments. The tool employed in this study can help establish baselines and measure impacts and sustainability of interventions after project completion, because you get these data sets that you can go back in time also. But it can also then help in ex-ante assessments of land cover change and associated carbon balance, and which can then also inform GEF project planning, for example, and which are the locations that show most promise for conservation in the future, and also the you can then help set realistic targets for projects. Information generated through this approach can be useful to address questions about land use change, natural capital valuation, biophysical measures, and sustainability of ecosystems services. We've talked with the GEF Secretariat and other partners about this tool, and I believe that there is some interest. But of course, this is not the only this type of tool, but it can be very useful and powerful, especially as resources are getting scarcer. Okay, that's the fun part that we have been doing. Then, and it's actually wonderful that OPS 6 is done, so we have a bit of luxury of doing these kind of things. But they are investments into future. We will be able to do better evaluations in the future. We've also invested in knowledge management, and obviously this disseminating the findings of the OPS 6 with members of the partnership and so forth. We've developed infographics and different formats of dissemination tools for OPS 6 findings. On Saturday, we presented to several constituency meetings. How many did we do? 6 constituency meetings here on targeted sort of like findings of OPS 6 and performance trends and so on to particular constituencies also. I hope that was useful to you. And we have invested in the website very much. So please go to gefieo.org, because we have quite a lot of, we have all the reports, the OPS 6 of course, but as you may remember, OPS 6 consisted of 29 separate evaluations and studies, so all of those reports are available. The infographics are available, and we have an interactive section on the website which displays data on performance and data from all kinds of evaluations that we have. So I hope that will be useful, and that will be something that you would visit, because it's pretty nice. We've also taken this opportunity of investing in ourselves a little bit, doing more staff training on geospatial methods, and also we had a tailor-made course by the World Bank internal, learning group to help us to train us to write better evaluation reports actually, these are very important for the reason, and I take this opportunity to say to you that, or remind you that in our model, in our business model, it's our staff who lead all of these evaluations, or 90% of the evaluations where we have expertise, we lead and conduct them and use consultants only for specific technical inputs. So it's very important that we actually know how to do this and stay at the top of the forefront of the methodologies and so on, and can communicate effectively. Okay. Then, as always, we do the management action record. In 2017, the Council endorsed 58 IEO recommendations presented in the May and November Council meetings through these semi-annual evaluation reports. But these have not been included in our MA yet because you need to allow some time for implementation. But in this particular case, so we have tracked management actions from 4 sets of evaluations: the CSO network evaluation, which found that that it has been basically followed up very effectively, and many of you have been part of this ad hoc working group that was set up to develop an updated vision for the relationship between the GEF and the civil society. The small grants program evaluation and some of these annual performance reports and annual country portfolio evaluation reports say, well, the annual country portfolio evaluation report has actually been done, so we have retired it, as the beautiful term goes. With the small grants and the annual performance report, which particularly related to the results-based management system of the GEF, it's still work in progress, but there is a lot of progress in being done. The details are again in the report. Okay, so now a little bit ideas about what we are up to now. We have started already a set of evaluations, and I probably don't go into the details, but you can expect, so we'll be back. So this is just a lull again before we are coming back with substantive evaluations and recommendations. Starting in, actually we put November, but it's now December Council, which is good for us because it gives us a month more time to complete these things. We will be presenting 4 evaluations to you at that point of time, including, the mainstream biodiversity was something that we tried to complete for OPS 6, but we were not able to complete it, but so that will be done now. But we have also very related evaluations on scaling up and additionality that are also building upon this sustainability work that we have been doing, and these are related set of things and which I believe are of interest to the Council. We have started 3 strategic country cluster evaluations, and I'm sure that nobody remembers it, but when I joined, and in June 2015, when I presented my first ideas for evaluation program, I launched this idea of the strategic country cluster evaluations. We never got around to doing them, but now we have started on looking into LDCs, SIDS, and African biomes, basically in the West African and Sahel ecosystems. So those will be coming to you in due course. There are also some things that I wanted to mention at this stage, and for example, there will be an evaluation of the country support program that is forthcoming, as well as the small grants program and so forth. Yesterday, we talked a lot, the Council talked a lot about the STAR allocation, and we did STAR evaluations both for GEF 5 and GEF 6, and based on our analysis of the GEF portfolio, the latest evaluation actually suggested that the sweet spot for marginal adjustment in the flexibility might be somewhere between 2 million and 5 million. This was, of course, made available as part of the OPS6 package to the replenishment process and the Council, but yeah. Yesterday, of course, we were also asked that we should do an early evaluation of the STAR to inform GEF 8 process. Another one is, of course, then yesterday that came up was this issue of this that we should be linked to the working group on governance, and the analysis that we did for OPS6 should inform the working group, and we are, of course, very much prepared to do so. So this is actually the only thing where we are asking for your approval and decision, which is the IEO budget for this fiscal year that starts in a week's time. Just a reminder that this is actually, from our point of view, this is the last year of GEF 6 budget. So this is what we are planning on doing. There's a couple, just 2 points. One is that this is actually 9.4% less than what we spent in current fiscal year that is ending. That is explained largely by the fact that we loaded a lot of our work into the OPS6, and therefore it can be lower. And of course, the fact that the fixed costs are quite high, it depends on the fact that, like I said earlier, it's our staff that actually design and conduct the evaluation. So the evaluation budget, which is very small at this stage, is basically for hiring consultants and travel in connection with the evaluations. That's it. I mean, is it appropriate to put the proposed decision up at this stage, or shall we?
So I think what we might do, and thank you, Juha, for that, is probably just do a quick round of any questions or comments, and ask you to address those, and then we can look at the decision itself. I think just in terms of sort of kicking off, Juha, you mentioned the percentage figure of sustainability for GEF programs. I think you said 62% was, quote, not shockingly low. Now, that's acknowledged, I think, but you will know better than most that the Council has focused heavily in the replenishment discussions and the review of OPS6 on trying to understand the sustainability rating and looking at the factors that are leading to it sitting at 62 and not being higher. And I think it's safe to say, speaking on behalf of colleagues, that you can expect the Council to continue to keep that in mind for their concern about the sustainability rating to remain, and for a continuing focus on increasing that rating. So we welcome welcome your focus on that and the learnings that you can provide to the GEF and the partnership to improve that rating and make it better than not shockingly low, I think. On the geospatial tool, I think that's a very interesting development and would welcome your continuing use of that. I think, as Peter Drucker said, what gets measured gets managed, and that's critical for us here. Finally, your contribution to the Council's work and your responsiveness to our discussions, be it on STAR or on the Working Group on Governance. Just again, thank you for your attentiveness to that and your continuing support for the Council's deliberations on these issues. But with that, I think, colleagues, the opportunity to ask Juha some more questions or comment on the report, please. And I see Joss followed by Nathan. Thank you.
Thanks, Co-Chair, and good morning, colleagues. I will first join our co-chairs. Thanks to the whole team, Juha and the whole team, for all the work, and also for this report and presentation. I have a very short question, and it ties in with what Peter just said. Sustainability, 62% comparison with other organizations. Big organization missing, UNDP, very important implementing agency, and was not in the list. Is there a particular reason for that? It struck us as the big absent. Thanks.
Thank you, Joss. Nathan, followed by Aparna, please.
Thank you, Juha, for that incredibly useful presentation, and to the rest of your team for helping to prepare the report. There's a lot in there to assimilate. We just have a couple of comments. The first is on gender. We welcome the improvement in gender-relevant information in the terminal evaluations following the adoption of the mainstreaming policy, but we would like to see the implementing agencies do better. 55% really is still too low. The Council has strong expectations around gender responsiveness. This is reflected in the mainstreaming policy and in the strategy we adopted yesterday, which we hope will help drive improvements in gender reporting and terminal evaluations. We won't dwell on the low sustainability rating. We're all concerned about it, but we just have two comments. It's not entirely clear to us how instructive the comparison with other multilats is, given that they're all GEF agencies. So we'd just like a little more information on how that was done. But what is instructive is that you've distilled the barriers to sustainability into a discrete set of issues that really need more attention at the development phase. Thanks.
Thank you, Nathan. Aparna, followed by Tamara, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. First of all, we appreciate the professional approach and the usefulness of this report. In particular, we would like to urge IEO to expand the use of technology, as you have demonstrated, for evaluating the outcomes and the impacts of GEF programs. I have just 3-4 points to make. One is that we are also keen that the evaluation of the sustainability of outcomes, as has been mentioned by Nathan, is developed further. I'm a bit intrigued by para 11 in the report, which notes that more projects showed environmental stress reduction and broader adoption at post-completion stage than at project completion. I would just like to understand this a little bit further. In your work in progress, we appreciate the evaluation of additionality of GEF projects and of scaling up projects, of GEF projects. Now, in respect of additionality, given the nature of GEF operations with implementing agencies, I believe how we establish and track the additionality brought by GEF financing in large projects would be important in guiding the use of GEF in these projects, and the role of recipient governments in seeking that additionality actively or pursuing it and identifying it is something that we would like IEO to explore and try to give us some kind of a feedback on that. Similarly, in terms of scaling up of innovative GEF projects, We would suggest that you could examine the role of both governments and local communities, whether there is sufficient consultation and buy-in at the early stage of scaling up of innovation projects. So how is this sort of built into the entire project cycle? At what point in time does it become apparent that there is a good potential for scaling up? And finally, I also welcome the evaluation of the private sector engagement, which we hope will explore the efforts to build domestic capacities in these areas, transfer technologies, and create a balance among the corporate, MNC, SMEs, micro enterprises, and also, as I have been stressing, the availability of an enabling policy and regulatory ecosystem to make an effective private sector engagement. All in all, we thank you for the report and suggest that you may like to explore these aspects a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Aparna. Tamara, please, followed by Marita.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the team for the excellent presentation. I'll be very quick. Canada very much values the whole evaluation concept, both for the learning, for the knowledge management, for the results, and most importantly for continuous improvement purposes. I will just associate us with others who've spoken about the importance of gender, fragile states, additionality, scaling up private sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tamara. Marita and then Paul, please.
Thank you, Chair. First, I would like to thank the IAO for its good work and a very interesting report. We note the relatively good GEF results achieved during the period assessed, but coming back to the question of sustainability, which several people have already addressed, we note, for example, the results for UNEP, and we are wondering what we can learn from this and how the GEF Secretariat foresees to address this further. I mean, this issue has been discussed throughout the replenishment, and I think learning now these numbers and the possible causes for these increased numbers in UNEP, it will be interesting to see whether we will take some action in the GEF. We also note that the Africa region best capture gender disaggregated data in projects and programs, which is a very good news, but the figure is still on the low side, and how can it be improved? And not only there, but in other regions. We can support the financial year 19 budget proposal and welcomes the decrease in variable costs. We note a decrease in cost regarding the participation in networks and platforms and knowledge and learning, and we would like to know what effects this could have on quality. We also note that the integration of cross-cutting issues is decreasing by 100%. How can this be explained? We also note the indicative 4-year budget for GEF 7 approved at the replenishment meeting, and encourage the IAO to seek further cost savings where possible during the period. Thank you.
Thank you, Marita. Next on my list is Paul, followed by Wang, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Co-Président.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and I'd also like to thank OIE, and I would nonetheless like to make a suggestion for improvement concerning the country performance. According to document, the index of country performance is based on the portfolio performance index, which gives results which do not totally reflect the true performance of the country. And therefore, we recommend that there be a more specific evaluation as concerns the country, with recommendations to improve our performance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Wang, and next, Marilyn, please.
Thank you very much for the very informative report and presentation. I just would like to share my quite similar concern on the sustainability, as pointed out by by colleagues around the table, in particular Marita's point. Actually, we noted that UNEP performance is much better than the others, and as you know, IO's findings that the evaluation methodologies for those agencies are quite different. So I'm wondering the outperforming result of UNEP is attributed to its own evaluation methodology, or it is because it really implement the project much better than the others. Because constantly I find the from the yesterday's discussion on the how those agencies use the GEF resources, UNEP's percentage is the highest among the others. So if it is the case, I mean, if UNEP is doing better job than the others, I'll be more than happy to say that. So I appreciate if IO can elaborate more on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Wang. Marilyn, followed by Cordula, please.
Merci. Merci pour cette présentation.
Thank you for this presentation, which is indeed very informative. I had a question. Well, in fact, you showed us how you could use geospatial data so as to evaluate the impact of projects on forests, for instance. But there are other impacts which are more difficult to show. Could we have an idea of the technology, if there are such technologies, which can reveal other types of impacts, and how GEF projects were able to make a positive contribution and fight or mitigate the degradation of soils or other areas through pollutants that are not so easy to highlight as in the case of forests. That was my first point. I also wanted to talk about the evaluation. You mentioned the 23 African countries that are being evaluated. Indeed, in the week of 11th of June in Senegal, we received Carlo Carugi, who came through the whole week and whom we were able to talk with, and was really very positive. He was able to meet with all those who are involved at GEF level. It was very positive. And this also enabled us to get the human element, which I think gives added value to what is done at GEF level. Thank you.
Cordula and Jan Pieter next. Thank you.
Thank you, Juha, for the comprehensive presentation. We very much value the work of the IEO, which is key to continuous learning and improvement of the institution. And we expect the results to continually feed into program development. Well, I was somehow struck by the differences in that you pointed out in the approaches on evaluation of the accredited entities, like Wang already mentioned. And this questions the comparability of the results that come out of their evaluations. And well, I assumed that there was international standards and best practices for evaluation, and I wonder why or if there couldn't be efforts to harmonize the approaches to increase comparability between the entities. Well, we would like to encourage also the follow-up on the sustainability issue, which we believe is a very important issue for the GEF, and would expect that there would be more reporting on the development of this aspect.
Thank you, Cordula. Jan Pieter, and then your neighbour, May.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Juha for a very interesting presentation and documents. although the sustainability rate may be comparable to other agencies, we cannot rest on our laurels. It's still not good enough. And we note the focus on explicitly addressing resilience in the document, which we think is a good idea, and we could refer to our comments on numerous occasions on programs dealing with food security in this regard, for example. Like India, we were struck by the reference to what's happening in the post-completion stage and would like some more comments from Juha on that. It seems important factors for success, again, agree with India, like stakeholder buy-in and conducive policy environment. Obviously important factors to bring along when developing the G7 projects, operationalizing a very difficult and challenging program directions document. And lastly, I would like to stress the importance of transparency in this design phase of the new portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan-Peter. May, and last on my list is Munenari.
Merci. Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Juha, for the presentation and more generally for the Bureau for the work that was done. The evaluation on the sustainability of projects was greatly expected. We discussed this at length during the replenishment meetings. It's good to see that it has improved over time, but I agree with Jan-Peter to say that it's probably not enough, because we have GEF requirements that are higher than for other institutions that carry out infrastructure projects. It would be interesting to see more recommendations as to the way we can improve the sustainability of GEF projects and the work of IO and concerning the impact and program impacts, and we wonder if it's possible to assess them according to what used to be called the French test in the replenishment meeting with the 3 criteria. I'm not going to come back on this. Now, 2 questions. One as concerns UNDP. At the end of the paper, we see that is a decision of Council whose level of adoption is only middling. And I would like to know why the country selection of countries for the small grants program wasn't modified, whereas this was something that was requested in June 2015. And finally, I'd like some clarifications on the percentage of 57%, which is mentioned for final evaluation submitted by UNDP on projects since GEF 3. Why is there such a low percentage? Because it impacts the overall results for GEF. And we're wondering if something that has recently improved. Maybe it's only GEF 3 that is a concern. And finally, on the budget, I would like to thank the Evaluation Office for efforts made, and also relate this to the budget that was actually used as opposed to the budget that was adopted. Thank you.
Okay, and last speaker on my list is Munenari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I just would like to ask 2 quick questions. First, I'd like to know how much savings you have generated by applying the World Bank capital increase agreement on staff salaries. The second one is actually based on the document. I understand that if we exclude the OPS 6 related cost, the operational cost of IEO actually increased by 2%, while the operational cost of Secretariat increased only 0.6%. If I understand correctly, both the IEO and Secretariat use the same World Bank HR and budget-related policies. So may I ask the IEO to clarify why are your operational costs increased higher than the Secretariat? Thank you.
Thank you, Munenari. Juha, that's a fairly lengthy list of questions. I hope you've got them all. I'm sure you have. I throw to you to respond to the Council, please.
Okay, thanks very much. And some of these questions obviously are things that we don't perhaps have full answers to. And the sustainability ratings, they are obviously something that we are taking very seriously and following up on. And the sustainability study, the additionality study, and the scaling up study are kind of parts of the same suite of these kind of studies that we are doing. Okay, so the point is very well taken that maybe the comparisons are not the best possible, especially given that they are all GEF agencies, and we should perhaps look at others. Why UNDP was not included in this study was that we were not able to, actually we couldn't find publicly available reports that provided a comparable sustainability rating for non-UNDP projects non-GEF projects of UNDP. So that's why it seemed quite futile to just to report on the sustainability on GEF projects. On UNEP, the rating is higher, and all of these are actually based on agency self-reporting. So we actually haven't been able to dig deeply into and saying that, you know, how reliable these figures are. But it's perfectly possible also that because all the agencies have different types of projects, they don't all do the same kinds of projects, and some are focusing more on the policy and legal and regulatory issues, and others are doing more concrete things. So maybe there are differences in sustainability of these also, but it could also have to do with the measurement issues. The agencies do have very different evaluation systems, and I'm not sure what, I mean, we have a monitoring and evaluation policy that is GEF wide and which we are updating and will be presenting to the Council in December. But the institutional arrangements are very different. So you have, for example, in UNDP and the World Bank, to take examples, you have systems where where the project terminal evaluations or implementation completion reports in the cases of the bank are the responsibility of the program, the project units, UNDP's country offices and the World Bank's task teams. And these are then quality assured by the independent evaluation units in both of these. Whereas in UNEP, it is the evaluation office of UNEP that conducts all of the project evaluations. And you have different systems and different institutional structures, so I'm not sure that whether we will be able to influence that actually in terms of harmonization, but the minimum standards that we put into the M&E policy apply obviously. Specific question from May in France about this submission rate of 57% of these terminal evaluations. That actually pertains to the medium-sized projects, not the full-size projects. So this is something that we have noted, that there are significant gaps when it comes to the MSP portfolio in terminal evaluations, and we will look into that also because of because we are going to do an MSP evaluation I should have said that because we've only done an MSP evaluation once, and the previous one was in 2002, and as it happens, I was the task manager of that evaluation. so it's nice to go back to that. Right. So the issue of the post-completion thing is that we actually then did a looked at the set of projects that were completed 4 years earlier. So it was so you have two kinds of sets. So you have those that are where we look only at the terminal evaluation, which is done at the end of the project. But then we had these, 57 projects where we were able to go and look 4 years after they were completed, and we could find these results, and which I think were quite encouraging actually in many ways. I don't know. Then right. Then it's issues about our budget on the. Yeah, our operational costs. Basically the operational costs pertain to the fact that we have what we did was that during the GEF 6 period we first of all we moved our operational model to the fact so that we had been using much more consultants, external consultants in the past in our evaluations and through our own internal capacity development and so forth. So we were able to move to a model where our staff actually leads and conducts these evaluations, and we also then moved these. The staff costs that in the past were part of the evaluation budget were now moved to operations budget, to the fixed cost. So that's basically the explanation for that, I think. And we I should say also that we haven't had any staff movement for the past 2 years. Nobody has left and nobody has come, and so there's a very stable staff, and we intend to maintain that exactly the same staff level and structure for the GEF 7 also. Right. And it is actually, I mean, we've been, again, doing some of these kind of comparators here, and IFAD, for example, which is a similar kind of size operation, which is headquarters based and actually has a more or less comparable portfolio size, and has the same independent evaluation office reporting to their board. And actually their cost, I forgot the exact figure, but it is actually significantly higher.
They're at 0.57, they're at 0.8.
Yeah, so we are 0.57 of the budget, and in IFAD's case they are 0.8% of IFAD's budget. So I think that we are in a pretty good shape there. There was a question from Sweden about the mainstreaming budget, and basically the point is that this is a budget that we are presenting now relates to the last year of GEF 6 for us, and these activities have basically been done. Am I missing some big questions? I think I can't read my notes even, but but basically, so there were also a number of suggestions to us which we should take into account in the evaluations that we conduct and in the future in our work program, and we definitely take heed of this advice that we have, and will be happy to discuss further also bilaterally on some of these issues.
And in GEF 7, we will be reflecting the land savings.
Yeah. And so we have also then started, of course, our planning for GEF 7 evaluation activities and so forth, and we will be presenting more details on these in the December council meeting, and obviously before that we will consult with you further on, even in this meeting yesterday, some ideas, new ideas came to us that we have to build into the GEF 7 evaluation work program, and including then these issues that were raised this morning here in this meeting. So we'll continue this discussion, and we try to be responsive to the council needs, because we report directly to you, and we take our marching orders from you. So I'm always extremely open to getting any ideas and getting any views from you anytime, and so are my staff, and we can continue even discussing here.
Okay. Juha, thank you very much. Yes, I think Jos, you please, followed by Marita.
Thanks very much for those answers. On the question of UNDP's apparent failure to comply on PCRs for MSPs, I think this is probably a management question, not an IEO question. In my house, DFID, failure to provide a PCR on time is elevated very quickly to senior civil service levels, and one gets into a lot of trouble. What kind of trouble is UNDP in, and how quickly can we expect this performance to improve? That's a question to the management.
Thank you, Jos. Marita and Munenari, please.
Thank you, Chair. I had 2 additional questions to the IAO, but I can ask them bilaterally in the interest of time. But I had 2 questions to the Secretariat. One was on the sustainability, what we can learn now from this evaluation, and on the causes of the potential causes why UNEP, for example, has much higher sustainability rating. The second was on the fact that the Africa region best capture gender disaggregated data and programs. And I mean, still the numbers are low, and how can we better capture this, improve these numbers? I think it would be useful if we could have the Secretariat comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marita, and Munenari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Maybe I missed from your response, but may I ask again how much savings you have generated by applying the World Bank Capital Increase Agreement on staff salary? Thank you.
Thank you, Munenari. First, I think, Juha, if you have any comments on that, and then maybe Nauko could offer a view on the comparative rating of sustainability between GEF and UNEP.
Okay, on that specific, and I'm very sorry I missed that question. We have calculated it, and the savings based on the general capital increase. There's these 5 areas, and the one where we can be very concrete is the salary scales, which is that limits the salary increases to 2%, and that is somewhere in the ballpark of $250,000. That's the saving. Of course, then you have others, notably relating to procurement and travel, and these are harder to estimate ex ante, but we are quite sure that we will be able to generate quite a lot of savings in these areas by even doing things like that, better planning, that that 3 months in advance when you are going to travel, so you book your tickets and you find and we always try to combine travel. For example, my colleagues who are here now have been doing field missions in China and in Bangladesh en route here. So there are these kind of areas where we can, and obviously we will report them every year to the Council on the savings. But the salary thing is a concrete thing where we can already estimate the savings. Sorry for missing that earlier.
Hi, actually, good morning to everyone. A very important question, actually, that kind of surfaced, and I very much agree with UK Joss that the low rate of that completion report of MSP, or actually the discrepancy of that the submission report between full and the MSP is actually that the more like our responsibility to actually to really take care of it. So that we just talked to my team, and then we will continue to, we will really take a hard look at it. We will discuss it with agencies and we will manage it. I very much agree on that, and this comes into our responsibility. So that's one. About the question about why the sustainability ratio is so different between it's a UNEP and us, to be honest, I really don't have a good answer now, but we at the same time promise that we will have a sustainability report, or actually this coming December council. So this is actually a good opportunity for us to take a look at it. In fact, that your study is very, very helpful for us to also take our own look, so that we will come back to you that in December about our thinking about the sustainability issue, and definitely we will take that particular question when we do that report and this December.
Thank you, Juha. Thank you also, Naoko. Colleagues, that's been a lengthy session, and I think we're very grateful to Juha for your comprehensive responses. We move on to the bit, of course, you're most interested in, and that's the decision that's before us relating to the budget. So that was displayed on the screen. It's in the document. Can I take the Council's agreement that the decision as presented on the budget is adopted? Done. Thank you very much. Great, Juha, thank you very much, and thank you also. Colleagues, given the discussions yesterday and a couple of items are coming back, we're proposing to make a slight adjustment to the agenda, and that's to capitalize on a little bit of time that we have currently before lunch to move now to agenda item 17, and that's the discussion on the work program. So with your agreement, we'll take that next. Before jumping into that, also just to note that as requested yesterday, the Secretariat is about to distribute an update paper on the STAR and the co-financing issue. And we would ask you to consider those over the lunch break. Similarly, the terms of reference for the working group on governance also will be circulated prior to lunch with a view to having a discussion this afternoon. So with your agreement, we will move now to agenda item 17, the work programme. And on that, I'll throw to Naoko. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, of agreeing to shift this item to the morning, and so that we can have a little bit more time in the afternoon. So I'd like to invite Gustavo to present this work program to you.
Thank you, Naoko. Good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce the work program that has been recommended for Council approval that requests $58 million from the GEF Trust Fund and $5.4 million in associated agency fees. The work program contains an indicative $300 million in co-financing, which means that every dollar provided by the GEF is expected to be matched by 5.2 in co-financing from other sources. I'm sure you'll notice that this work program is relatively small in comparison with prior ones, which is a reflection of the limited availability of funds for programming as of May 25th, when we had to constitute the work program. And in constituting the work program, with limited resources, we applied the Council decision that came from the 51st meeting in October 2016 that called for the Secretariat, in light of the shortfall, to undertake programming aiming to maintain the balance among regional allocations in GEF 6 replenishment decision, in particular assisting least developed countries and small island states in accessing resources and supporting core obligations to the conventions. So in adherence to this decision, the proposed work program emphasizes funding for LDCs and SIDS, while promoting a more balanced programming across focal areas in GEF 6 to date. If the proposed work program is approved by the Council, all projects from LDCs and SIDS that have been technically cleared by the time of work program constitution will have been programmed in the GEF 6 cycle, as well as requests for funding from conventional obligations. To conclude, if this work program is approved in its entirety, a total of $19.2 million from star locations in biodiversity, climate change, and land degradation will be programmed for 8 countries. And in addition, the work program includes $36.1 million from international waters directed at SIDS and LDCs. The international waters focal area is lagging a bit behind in programming, and this work program restores a better balance across focal areas at the conclusion of this replenishment cycle. If the work program is approved as submitted, 33 recipient countries will benefit from GEF support, including 14 LDCs and 10 small island developing states. With this, I turn the floor back to the co-chairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gustavo. Now I would like to open the floor for your comments and the questions. Floor is yours. Francois, please.
Bonjour, merci Madame la Présidente.
Good day, everyone, and thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the Secretariat for having prepared this latest work program for GEF 6. My first comment is that we have the final snapshot of resources agency by agency, and we see that 11 agencies out of 18 captured less than 2% individually, and those 11 agencies represent 11% of the total, whereas 3 agencies captured 69% of GEF 6 resources. We've already discussed this point, but it seems to us to be a situation that is too lopsided, it is too imbalanced. And with the proposal that was mentioned yesterday by Norway, we think that we shall be working further on possibly getting this straightened out so that the partnership can be a little bit more balanced. As usual, I shall try to come up with suggestions for overall improvement, using, of course, specific concrete examples from the draft work program. My first point is on the need in PIFs to have a better contextualization of projects. That's my first point. Let me take the example of the Principe project, a project that we support in terms of its objectives and activities, which are highly relevant. However, we find that the PIF does not give all the necessary information in terms of who is doing what at the present time amongst the present-day partners involved. So the first gap here is that UNESCO is not mentioned. The island of Principe is a biosphere reserve. This is stated, but all the projects and research actions that have stemmed from the achievement of that particular biosphere status are not mentioned. It seems to us very important that the GEF cycle take that on board. A second point is the institutional framework, which also needs to be revised here, both in terms of how it hinges on the work of local authorities, but also the work of local NGOs. The list of local NGOs is not sufficient. We also need to bear in mind a mission in 2016, an expedition for research purposes on marine ecosystems. Another point in terms of missing contextualization is not mentioned in the same PIF. What is at stake in terms of exploration and extracting of oil and gas in the waters of this country? How could that project have an impact? And lastly, on the same project, I'd like to mention an initiative called SMILO. It is supported by the French Fund for the Global Environment with the help of the Conservatoire du Littoral of France, which promotes the exchange of optimal practices, of best practices, with the small island territories. SMILO works on some 20 pilot islands, including Principe. Principe has just established its SMILO Island Committee, which we believe will be an excellent interlocutor for GEF. My second comment, or my second recommendation, has to do with how the different soft activities and the investment activities are interconnected in our projects. It's all the more important for us to seek even greater clarity on this in terms of how investment is co-financed. So let me take the example of the Nauru project. This is a project that we support because, in our opinion, it is very relevant to work on promoting renewable energies and energy efficiency in SIDS. This being said, here again, there is an opportunity to have an island as a test pilot for the development of renewable energies, but at the same time, we'd like to suggest the development of the smart grid aspect here, with an emphasis on demand-side management. Our question here is, why do we have such little information on investment activities in this project? We do see that in component 2, there is a component on investment, but for the part that is funded by GEF, we see mainly soft activity, but out of the 10 million that is co-financed by Nauru Utilities Corporation, we see no explanation. It seems important to us to have within the PIFs more information on what specifically is being funded as an investment activity by the co-financing entities. This makes it possible to better understand how the GEF funding and GEF activities interrelates with the activities funded by the co-financing partners. And I think this is important to better understand the sustainability of the project. Okay, I think I'll leave my comments at that for the time being. Written comments will be sent in the next few days, and these will be more comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. May I call on Lauren of Norway, followed by Paul, Madagascar.
Thank you. We would like to thank the Secretariat for the overview provided in the work program document and for the project documents. We have looked at some of the projects and we'll send you also some comments in writing following the meeting, but we also have a few general comments to make, and they're actually a bit similar to the ones made by France, but looking at giving examples from some other of the projects. Regarding the umbrella program on the reporting to the UNFCCC, we noticed some issues around sustainability, about national ownership, and ensuring robust institutional arrangements for this program. On the other side, we are pleased with the strong stakeholder engagement that is planned in this process and the integration of women's empowerment and gender consensus. We need more information on the coordination with other relevant transparency initiatives at the global level to ensure that there's no overlap or duplication of this work. Regarding the forestry program in Equatorial Guinea, as you probably know, forestry is an important issue for Norway. There's a large co-financing that is planned, including from the government, and we believe that this should be followed up closely, and there should be some clarity regarding the funding that is provided by the Central African Forest Initiative, CAFI, as well. We are happy to see that this project builds on and is connected to other relevant projects in the country. We believe that there are risks to project results and sustainability, and that these should be better reflected in the proposal, together with better elaborated risk management plan. Finally, regarding the Bay of Bengal program, we recognize the complexity of the project, as it's also described in the STEP review, and that this is an ambitious project. The complexity leads to increased risks, but much can be gained by increased collaboration between the neighboring countries, even though this is also not free from challenges, as STEP recognizes. The project gives emphasis on the involvement of stakeholders and gender issues and human rights, and we find that very positive. There's a pollution component in the program, which includes marine litter and plastics, and we would like to stress that combating marine plastics is key to maintaining ocean health and marine biodiversity. And finally, we are pleased to see that there's a good balance between the focal areas, thanks to this work program for the whole of the GEF 6. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren. May I call on Paul, followed by Kojura.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the Secretariat team for preparing this document. My comments are chiefly on medium-sized projects. Yesterday, we referred to the balance from GEF 6 to GEF 7, which was on the increase. And in Africa, we have under STEP 6 a medium-sized project, which is technically validated by the Secretariat, but has not yet had an appropriation, the approval from the DG. We would like to see that project approved under GEF 6, since it is a STAR project. It's a project for Mauritius concerning soil degradation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. May I call on Kojura, followed by CSO representative.
Well, thank you for the presentation. To be short, well, we support the point made by France on the distribution between the agencies in the program. We support what Norway says on the good balance across focal areas, and we would like more information about the co-financing question, especially also from the private sector, in line with what we were discussing yesterday on co-finance. On the individual projects, as usual, we will send our comments in written form.
Thank you, Cordula. May I call on CSO representative?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The GEF CSO network, having reviewed document GEF C54 by Tharing on work program along with PIFs for more than 40 project concept and programmatic framework of GEF Trust Fund, makes the following observation and recommendations for kind consideration of the Council. The successful launching of the pilots in GEF 6 for innovative and integrated interventions despite constraints in resources is highly appreciated, and it is expected that the trend would continue in future. It is, however, recommended that projects with components of adaptive mitigation and community resilience may be prioritized for funding as an integrated approach in achieving the SDG targets ahead. A growing trend of funding in GEF 6 has been indicated in focal areas like transboundary waters and as well regional interventions, keeping the prime priorities on LDCs and SITS, wherein it is recommended that in regional projects, partnerships with regional CSOs and engagement of multi-stakeholder actors on regional platforms may be promoted to ensure inclusive approach for sustainability. In agreement with the revised policy document 2017 for stakeholder participation, as in clause 6A to E of Annex 1, page 8, effective engagement, inclusive and meaningful participation of the CSOs and IPOs are still awaiting consideration of the Council for improvement. Perusal of PIF and PIF review notes of most recently approved projects, for example, Bhutan, India, Manas River Basin Management, GEF ID 10033, concept approved on 1st June 2018, has consulted no CBOs or IPOs in Bhutan and only one CSO from India that has no competency on the core intervention area. Similarly, projects in Maldives, GEF ID 9668, and Myanmar, GEF ID 9890, has not documented adequate CSO engagement or stakeholder involvement component in the project. As part of this end, the following recommendations based on the new policy guidelines 2017 are submitted before the Council for kind consideration. That in agreement with clause 6 of Annex 1 of the new guideline, local CSOs, CBOs, and IPOs must be consulted in every project towards participation, decision-making, and for FPIC throughout the project cycle. That in compliance with clause 16, A, B, and C in section C, page 10 of the policy, capable CSOs at the national level and within country having proven competency in the concerned field must be engaged throughout the project cycle. The GCN recommends that necessary enlistment of CSOs may be initiated for the same by the OFPs at the country level, for which selection criteria may be drafted out. That also, this is in concurrence with the proposition of India, Argentina, and Spain on day 1 of the 6th Assembly for the accreditation of in-country implementing agencies to ensure better coordination of the OFPs during the project cycle. It further recommends that among the above CSOs and IPOs, there must be members of the GEF CSO network also who would be knowing the work program and shall duly endorse the consultation being in it. In agreement with the clause 12 in section A, page 10, implementing agencies vis-a-vis GEF agencies must categorically mention the budget inline items being allocated for the above engagements and shall also include provisions for consultation fees in the said budget. In agreement with section C, clause 16, D and E, page 10 of the policy document, enunciating documentation for transparency, it is further recommended that to improve the work program and make it further inclusive and transparent, the comprehensive recommendations, suggestions of stakeholders, and inputs from CSOs, CBOs, and IPOs during consultation may be placed in the public domain with names and contacts of the contributors, along with the PIF review document. The GCN believes that strengthening the ties with place-based stakeholders and national-level CSOs in a more formal and organized way would enable resource amplification, knowledge economy, and reciprocal partnership for the implementing agents, only to add to sustained impact and inclusive growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, may I call on Kulekani from Botswana?
Thank you very much, Chair. My intervention is quite short. I would like to express our appreciation for the work program, and we do support the approval of the work program. We note, of course, that most of the projects are diverse in the coverage of current global environmental challenges. We further appreciate that my constituency has a project in the current work program, and the project will be in Lesotho, and it will focus on the integrated water management for improved agro-pastoral livelihoods. These wetlands are a key contributor to the water system in Southern Africa, and in Southern African region, and related livelihoods. And with that, thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite, now I see the new flag. Brian, please.
Thank you to the GEF Secretariat, the implementing agencies, and the countries for this final work program of the GEF 6. We appreciate the Secretariat's efforts to balance this work program towards the achievement of GEF 6 programming directions. While the Secretariat did come very close to the 4-week prior required release date for the work program, this timeline was still challenging given the later arrival of the STAP reviews. As we look towards a larger work program for the 55th Council meeting in the fall, we continue to encourage the Secretariat to find ways to meet this 4-week minimum release date. The United States, in light of its policies for certain development projects in countries whose governments do not have in place a functioning and transparent military audit and have violated human rights, abstains from participating in the decision on the Promoting Community-Based Forestry for Climate Change Mitigation and Sustainable Livelihoods project in Equatorial Guinea. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite the team to respond. Oh? Sorry, one more. Okay, 2 more. All right, Abdullah first, and followed by Marike.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The constituency I represent will want to show approval for this particular work program, especially in the area of the emphasis made on LDCs and seeds in terms of the resources provided to those categories. Studies have shown that LCDs and seeds are very much prone to environmental disasters and climate challenges. And therefore, our constituency will want to appeal that going forward for future programming, more allocation should be provided to those categories. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Marike, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Naoko. At the beginning of our council meeting, we had asked to include a topic in other matters or miscellaneous, but having listened to the previous speakers, having listened to the comments of the different delegates, we'd like to make a brief reference to it now because it has to do, in fact, with the work program. We welcome this work program, and we welcome the priority that the GEF is given to the lesser developed countries and small island states, taking into account the budgetary limitations and constraints which were referred to at the last stage of GEF 6. As far as we are concerned, some of the countries in our group, in our constituency, have projects that have been with technical clearance that have not been included in this work program. We understand that the reason for this is that there were no remaining funds in the current project cycle of GEF 6. And we'd like to make two comments, two observations about this. To reach technical clearance for these projects, we've needed human resources, monetary resources, and time for the preparation of these projects. And furthermore, we see that there is a GEF policy, a carryover, as it were, of outstanding contributions of GEF 6. Taking into account these two comments, my constituency would ask that these projects with technical clearance that have not been included in the current work program, that we would give them the possibility of being included as priority projects with relation to, or as well as other projects, for the next cycle, project cycle GEF 7. The reason for this is the projects that I'm referring to, as long as they are adjusted to the new priorities of GEF 7, and also considering that there are funds available, of course. In other words, the idea would be, if possible, of course, that there would be a mechanism that would not require to do the whole process over again, which would also mean the use of additional funds, because to reach technical clearance of a project, we also require funds, and we've already used funds for GEF 6. In other words, try to avoid the initial steps until technical clearance. That will not only save us funds, of course, and not start from zero this new project. That's the proposal that I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I now see the Ali Untitled from Mongolia. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is a bit complicated to call. I would just make it very brief and short. Our constituency is fully supporting the contribution made by the colleague on the technical cleared project proposal, and then also the future consideration for GEF 7, and to allocate more financial support for those countries who benefited from the budget appreciation for GEF 6.
Thank you so much. Now we would like to respond, and I first would like to actually respond to Enrique, and I feel your pain, the pain of your constituency, and the pain is actually ours too. We also spend the time and energy to actually technically clear those projects, so that I fully understand that what you mean by saying that. In terms of your question about if these projects could have a priority access or not. And the rule is, as you may know, that these projects have to be resubmitted for the new investment cycle. However, assuming that they are broadly remaining in also the GEF 7 strategy, meaning that that it is kind of justified under the new strategy, new object, and then that we will definitely look into it. So that will be my response to you. Now I would like to ask that Gustavo and the team to respond on other questions.
Well, thank you very much for the support of the work program and also for the very relevant comments that we will bring to the agencies either directly now or once you submit your written comments. Some of you have already done that, and we wait for the others within a few days. Just on a couple of points on the umbrella program, on the question of the sustainability of institutional arrangements. One way that UNEP is trying to improve the sustainability of these arrangements at the institutional level is by providing opportunity for countries to undertake national stock-taking exercises for subsequent national communications and BURs after they complete their national communications and BURs under Component 2, so that we can continue to promote continuous reporting and maintenance of the teams that are producing these reports in place. And we hear you on the question of CBIT and other transparency mechanisms, and we are working with the agencies and countries to ensure that their work on national reporting, national communications, BURs, are well coordinated with the CBIT to avoid overlap in activities and to promote synergies. And many times it involves the same teams of government at the government level and specific activities of the CBIT projects informing the preparation of these reports, but the activities not overlap at times, but we are aware of that and make sure that this happens. I guess this is it. The question from Mauritius. Of course, as you know, MSPs are not part of work programs, and MSPs to have a different track financially. We have also, like we have for full-size projects, a long pipeline of projects for which resources, and we fund them as resources become available. So we are getting very close to the end of the GEF 6 cycle, and we don't know yet what we'll be able to address until the end of actually this week, next week. So we can take this conversation in parallel, and we can let you know what the prospects are. Thank you.
So with this, may I seek your approval of the work program? Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Before you leave for lunch, two statements. The one is from me about actually that the papers that we have now 3 papers to distribute it to you, and one is actually that a series of kind of collection based on yesterday's discussion. So this is about upgrading co-financing policy, upgrading STAR system, and also that updated results architecture. We have a several discussion yesterday, and now that we are actually making some proposal of the collection to you, so then please pick it up. The second paper we were proposing, we were distributing, is actually the revised TOR of the PSAG, a private sector advisory group. It's now ready, so please take a look. The third paper is actually from Stefan. This is actually the TOR, terms of TOR and members of the working group on governance. So that this is the third paper, and then each the constituency please pick up 2 of each, and so that everybody can have an access to it. So that's announcement from me. And by the way, we will have some discussion this afternoon on those papers that are now being distributed. Now, William.
Thank you very much. Then all that's left is the lunch arrangements like yesterday. We will have some side events here, and you saw there are box lunches, so those of you who'd like to enjoy those can stay here. For the rest, there's transportation over to the Furama, same restaurant as yesterday, for the buffet. So considering it's almost 12:30, let's be back by 2 o'clock. Thank you very much. 2?